Good afternoon. The 10,113 meeting of the Security Council is called to order.
I will tell you, you're not going to have a war with me, and you're not going to have a third world war with me. That I can tell you.
Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Okay.
The Iranian regime seeks to kill. The lives of courageous American heroes may be lost, and we may have casualties. That often happens in war. But we're doing this not for now. We're doing this for the future, and it is a noble mission.
So the president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed. And then we would all be here answering questions about why we knew that and didn't act.
So if anything, I might have forced Israel's hand. But Israel was ready, and we were ready, and we've had a very, very powerful impact.
And I said, this is our first Jewish president. Now he's the first Jewish president to serve two.
We didn't start this war, but under President Trump, we are finishing it. Their war on Americans has become our retribution against their Ayatollah.
Welcome, new Templars. I'm Dylan Lewis Monroe, aka A145, the Map Maker. How'd you like that intro? Pretty much included all the most critical clips of statements from this administration up till this point in that intro. So obviously the big subject today is, I'm not sure if we should call it a war on Iran. I'm calling it attack on Iran in the video title. I would love to call this a special military operation, you know, the way Russia kind of downplayed what happened in Ukraine. That ended up being quite a bit of a war. You know, that's still going on, like, what, 2 years later. So, yeah, this was not exactly a campaign promise, I would say. It's a little maybe embarrassing initially at first for those of us who supported Trump on his whole End the Endless Wars platform. But I've been doing some deep thinking about this, some deep analysis, obviously doing a lot of monitoring the situation. And I'm going to come at this from, you know, the 40,000 foot perspective, even the space perspective. I'm going to come at this from even like the exopolitics perspective, because I think that this could go all the way back to the stories of the origins of our civilization and that good old extraterrestrial species, the Anunnaki, as well as reptilians, is related to this whole situation. So this has really divided people. You know, it's really split the American public on the subject with a pretty strong disapproval of us engaging in this military operation in Iran. One of the biggest questions for me is this a war? Is this a regime change war, or is this a special operation? Because, you know, we already got excited about Venezuela. That ended up being not even a one-day event, you know, just even a few hours, at least so far. That seems to be a one and done. Now, is Iran going to be a little bit more of a troubled topic? We'll see. But we have from Trump himself saying yesterday that this is projected to be a 4 to 5 week long operation, but we can go longer if necessary. The Ghost said on Nino he has 60 days under a state of emergency. So it's looking like it will be short. And, you know, honestly, I don't consider something that's only like, well, we've had wars specifically with Israel, like the 12-day war, like these short little wars that are only like a few days, you know, just like aren't really like they have a big impact in the long term. But in terms of what we think of as Americans, and, you know, today as a war, you know, our minds go to Afghanistan and Iraq primarily, which obviously ended up being way bloated, way more than we signed up for, ended up being military industrial complex bonanza with contractors exploiting all the bills that they were giving us for those wars. So that's what we want to try to avoid. Now, we obviously have this massive military, we can use it effectively and strategically to improve the world. That is a question of American imperialism, or if America is meant to police the whole world. But, an increasingly globalized society, even countries on the other side of the world that maybe weren't necessarily going to directly attack America, but could be in many different ways causing repercussions down the road for America, specifically with like terrorism and what Iran was doing with a lot of other countries. Iran was a state sponsor of terrorism, backing Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthi rebels in Yemen, among others. One has been saying that Iran played a big role in these genocides that have happened in the Congo. And I would also just bring up Islam in general is a big problem in both, third world as well as first world countries, with replacement migration, Sharia law becoming implemented. And, not to say that taking out Iran will fix the problem of Muslim invasion in Western countries. As we see, it's even worse in France and in Germany and in UK than it is in America, that America has, under Democrats, was on the road to becoming more like UK and France, where, the population demographic has shifted so much that Christians becoming the minority. So that is a concern as well. And, I'm not sure that taking out Iran directly affects that, but, it may be a step in the right direction of, cutting off the source of Islam at the source, as opposed to, dealing with these repercussions and allowing it to flourish in the Middle East. And of course, the stated goal of this is not to eliminate Islam, but, we have Pete Hegseth as our Secretary of War with his 𝕯𝖊𝖚𝖘 tattoo. And so, in a way, you can see this maybe as the Last Crusade, perhaps. New Templars. So there's a lot of different ways to look at this, but essentially, like, opinions are split down into. Well, I don't know if the libtards even really have an opinion on this, but from looking at Twitter, there are two prevalent opinions on this subject. And, I feel like one of them is just like blank trust of the whole plan and the situation, and the other one is maybe misplaced distrust. And so neither, I feel like, is completely correct. And I'm gonna go through in this video essentially a lot of the developments, what has actually happened, what we know has happened, and then towards like the later half of the video, get to my own download and opinion on what's going on, which I've already kind of explained a little bit of it in this intro here. But the two prevalent opinions are, number one, that Trump has pulled a 180 on nearly every mandate he campaigned on, and it proves that they have horrific blackmail on him, that Howard Lutnick standing his shoulder at all times proves that he's, under the influence of Israel. You can't miss it anymore, and many people have called this out. So we do have some slides to go with this. I think this video is going to be more based on just stuff that I'm presenting and reading than the slides, but I have a lot of memes basically from X, related to that first opinion, essentially saying like this is a cover-up of the Epstein operation or the Epstein files. After Bibi Netanyahu visiting the White House, 5 or 6 times at this point since this administration began, there's a lot of concern, I would say, about overt Israeli influence in this administration, and especially this image. Oh, all my images are popping up the wrong size here. Let's try to resize these quickly. Scale images to fit. So it's a little smaller there, but you see these are the most prominent Jews in this administration. And, these are definitely Jews. I'm not sure if you would call them Zionists or not. I'm not sure how much they stand with the Israel program. You know, Jared Kushner is pretty strong about that. But then you got Susie Wild, Steve Witkoff, Steve Miller, Howard Lutnick, and Miriam Adelson, who's a donor. She's not in the administration, but has a pretty powerful influence. So, I mean, you can go on Nick Fuente's channel and hear all about that. You know, these theories that Israel's controlling the USA, that the AIPAC has too much influence, that they have blackmail on Trump. That's all opinion one, I would say. And, you know, it's very easy to go onto Twitter and see these memes. You know, we have a meme of a military patch saying like Operation Epstein Diversion. I have all these different memes, but I didn't want to show all of them because, you know, it's fun to sort of entertain that, but I don't actually think that that's fully what's going on. That doesn't fully explain what's going on. And I even think that it may be part of this administration's strategy to allow those kind of discussions and theories to flourish. Because what those are doing is, you know, while we're currently engaged in this military operation against Iran with Israel, it's a joint operation. As we know, you know, Cuba has said saving Israel for last. And, you know, Trump has said things and posted things in the past, you know, indicating not being fully on the same page with Israel, you know, potentially gearing up for an eventual shift on how we treat our greatest ally, Israel. And so, you know, this could be saving Iran for first and saving Israel for last, or maybe even allowing Iran to deal with Israel before this is all over. You know, we've heard before, when your enemy's in the process of destroying itself, you don't get in the way. And I think that this could be a case of if two of your enemies want to destroy each other, maybe side with one for a while and then let the other one let them both mutually destroy each other. Could be another little strategy going on here. So the second opinion that is floating around on the X space is essentially what I was referring to as like the blind trust, something along the lines of what is happening in the world is utterly mind-blowing. God is literally using Trump to end the worldwide rule of evil. Every evil stronghold is coming down one by one. So I would say I'm more in that camp, but I definitely want to do more analysis to make sure that that's really what's going on and not just saying, you know, because Trump wore a white hat when he made this announcement, that this is all the white hat operation. Because, again, on the surface, this looks like the original deep state plan that we had heard about ever since 9/11 and the Iraq war. And that person from the Pentagon who said, you know, we have a plan to take down 7 countries in 5 years with Iran at the end of the list. So why didn't any of the deep state presidents ever actually get to Iran is a question. You know, that maybe that plan was not even really what they really intended. Maybe Iran was always intended to be this boogeyman to finance terror around the world and be the foil against the Western protagonists here. So RT has been looking into how has the general U.S. public reacted to this. And let's go back up to this image, perhaps. This is a really interesting image showing how Iran has retaliated and struck. I'm not sure what the count is now. It started as like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. When you include the bases of other countries, it's up to maybe like 11 different countries have been struck by Iran in retaliation to this. So, I mean, that's a lot of people to piss off, you know, like as like a regional war. Like, you're definitely courting a greater alliance to come against Iran by responding like this. And, you know, some of these lines you see going off towards Europe are not really very accurate, but they have hit French and UK military bases in the Middle Eastern countries. So this is showing like attack on a consulate or an embassy or a military base of another country, even if it's in, say, Saudi Arabia or Bahrain, constitutes an attack on that country. And so, you know, when you include all these countries, it's quite a big list of countries that Iran has struck in retaliation here. And like with Syria, I think that's like including like US bases in Syria. So the RT poll, or it's not RT's poll, but opinion polls showed growing discontent with this campaign. A YouGov Snap poll conducted on the first day of the strikes found that only 34% of Americans supported the action, with 44% opposed, marking a historic low in initial support for a major U.S. military campaign, as opposed to the war in Afghanistan, which had 92% initial approval, and the war in Iraq, which had 71% approval. A Reuters poll released the next day showed even lower backing, with just 27% approving of the U.S. strikes against Iran and 43% opposed. Moreover, 56%, including 1 in 4 Republicans, said Trump is too willing to use military force under the pretext of advancing U.S. interests. So yeah, I was kind of like taken by surprise from this war or military operation, just because, I mean, I knew that the carrier fleets were amassing around there, but they really hadn't hyped it up very much, you know, and Trump was even still grandstanding about his huge victory of taking out Iran's nuclear program last summer in the strictly one-day operation. That was like, well, why are we doing this now? You know, he mentioned it briefly in his State of the Union speech, which I know my last video was made just a few hours before his State of the Union speech, so I haven't really talked about his State of the Union speech in a video yet. But this Iran war definitely takes priority. And so he did sort of like drum up, you know, support for possible like regime change in Iran a little bit in the State of the Union speech, but this was nothing like we've seen in the past for Iraq or Afghanistan, where we get like weeks and months of continual demonization of the intended target of these incoming military campaigns. And so I think a lot of Americans like to explain those low polling numbers of support for this operation, I would say I think a lot of Americans don't even really understand why this is happening. They may not even really understand, you know, the funding that Iran has been giving to so many of these different terrorist groups. But I think, you know, the people that do support probably just think, you know, Muslim, Islam, Al-Qaeda, terrorist, jihad, like it's all kind of rolled into one big enchilada, and you know, it's our MO to just steamroll all of it. But yeah, this really wasn't promoted well enough. You know, if this was like an event at a club, like it was not, like there was no flyer, like it wasn't promoted properly. And so, you know, this is again Trump unhinged in term 2. You know, he is obviously concerned about the midterm elections, or he should be perhaps, unless they know something that's coming before then. But he's not concerned about getting reelected himself. And so it's time to get done whatever needs to get done. And he's not as concerned with the popularity of it because he's a term 2 president. And so he's getting it done, you know, whether it's a white hat agenda or a military industrial complex deep state agenda, he's getting it done. And I'm hoping that this ultimately becomes apparent that this is a white hat agenda. But I'm sort of like reserving full judgment on this yet, because, you know, we don't know how long it's going to be. We don't know if it's going to ultimately end in Israel being saved for last or not. And so those are big questions. And we don't know, obviously, how many casualties of Americans, soldiers, that there will be, which is also a very big factor in whether people support a war or not. Like with Vietnam, people supported going in, and then as casualties started mounting, you know, the war became very unpopular and ultimately ended in defeat. So I want to mention a couple things that happened in the lead up to this. You know, obviously the main topic on X, not in the mainstream media, was the Epstein files prior to this. And so some people are, you know, looking at this as sort of a diversion from the Epstein files, which this has really steamrolled that discussion. But in the days really just prior, I think late last week, Thursday perhaps, was Hillary Clinton's testimony to Congress about the Epstein situation. And so definitely seeing higher level players in the hot seat, Now, it is true that not usually too much really comes from these congressional hearings and investigations. Congress is not the DOJ. But just seeing Hillary and Bill, I think Hillary was Thursday, Bill was Friday last week in their testimony. It's promising that, this ancient prophecy now back from 2017 of mass arrests and arrests of key members of the Democrat Party, including Hillary Clinton, Obama, and of course there are other high-ranking agency directors like Brennan, is still coming down the pipe slowly but surely. And some people of Q mind are saying that these operations in Iran and Mexico, specifically against the cartels, are related to neutralizing some of the deep state's dead man switches or proxy assets that could have been activated if these major arrests do happen in the USA. And so I find that plausible, but we gotta make sure that does happen eventually, or even if it already has happened, that it needs to be publicly disclosed eventually. So also in the lead up to this attack on Iran, there was some interesting back and forth going on between our military and their AI contractors. And there was a controversy with the US government cutting their contracts with the AI development company called Anthropic, who makes an AI named Claude, and switching to using OpenAI's ChatGPT for their military applications. And the reason for that was that Anthropic was opposed to the US using their AI for mass surveillance, I believe, of Americans, and wanting the AI to have lethal capabilities. And so they had sort of pumped the brakes and said that, we're not going to work with you, or we're going to put limitations on our AI if you want to use it. And that enraged Donald Trump, Pete Hegseth, and all of them. And they sort of said that Anthropic was run by pussyfoot liberals, and so switched to Sam Altman's company, OpenAI's ChatGPT. And all of a sudden, we're at war with Iran. And so, again, you got to wonder how big of a role is AI playing in all these decisions. I have personally felt intuitively that AI has, in a way, taken over ever since 2020 and the COVID lockdowns that happened. And so we could still be in that era, and big nationwide policy shifts could be happening just by switching AI what do you call it, consultation services alone. And we also have to look at the bigger picture in 2026 so far. Even though Iran may look and feel a lot like the original neocon Middle East agenda, I think it's important to look at this in a bigger context of, we saw first Venezuela, Maduro. We saw second El Mencho, the biggest cartel leader in Mexico, go down. I guess that not really civil, but cartel warfare in Mexico has somewhat died. I haven't heard much about it, since the few days after the El Mencho arrest. But now we have Iran as well. So, I think it is important to look at this in the context of Trump going after some of these biggest cartel, rogue state, terrorist leaders in not just the original Middle East plan, but in a new, bigger white hat plan to sort of mop up the world of these deep state proxy, fringe state actors. So now getting into really the nitty-gritty of the developments of this Iranian conflict, which, many of you may have already heard some of this, but we're going to go over the basics. Trump put out his initial announcement video about this in the early morning hours of Saturday, I believe around 2 a.m., February 28th. He appeared in a white hat with no tie. And you saw a little bit of that 8-minute video in the intro to this. Personally, I found that video very strange, very unsettling. It didn't even feel like Trump, honestly, having seen him campaign so many times on no more wars, no endless wars in the Middle East. To see that video and the justification he tried to give, like going all the way back to some hostage, situation in the 80s, and then talking about the IEDs in Iraq, it's like, all right, if you have to go back that far, you're kind of pulling at straws here to make a justification for the war. And it's like, again, typically you would have made some of those justifications before this actually happened to get the American people on board, because he's not selling it. He's such a good salesman, in all his campaign speeches and everything. The speech announcing this war in Iran was like, it was just basic like warmongering, and full of lies. I mean, I hate to say Trump's full of lies, but it was like, I just wasn't buying it. It almost didn't even seem like him. Like, I wanted to believe it was AI. And of course it looked like him, but like, you never know in the end. But it seemed like it was like a basic script that came off like Colin Powell's UN speech from the Iraq war back like 20 years ago. And so then it's also strange, like the no tie, the wearing the white hat. I guess he wears like the no tie when he's in the Situation Room, like when we're at war, like it's like Zelensky wearing the military fatigues. It's like Trump takes off the tie when things are getting real hot. But again, it felt pretty forced. It felt like a pretty bad sales pitch. And I think that's part of the reason why, the support is so low. Like, you can't say like, well, they made an IED like 20 years ago and had a few hostages like 50 years ago. And so we got to do regime change. Like, something's not adding up. Like, it feels like we're not being told the true reasons about this conflict, which is, you could say for probably any conflict. But of course, this is not an exception. And so, I'm going to try to get to some of like the real reasons later in this video. But some of the other developments is that Iran is threatening to shut down or prevent ships from passing through the Strait of Hormuz, which would dramatically affect worldwide energy. And like, what would they say? 20% of the world's oil flows through that narrow ocean passage. You see here the supreme leader of Iran, the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, confirmed dead. So that's major, because he's been their supreme leader ever since the revolution in the 70s. In the course of the initial wave of attacks, Israel blew up a school, of course, and murdered apparently about 60 children, is what we're seeing. So, that's not really on the US's hands, since Israel did it, but, we're participating in, it's just what Israel always does, essentially, with no repercussions, obviously. And so then we've seen somewhat conflicting statements coming from this administration, which you saw in the intro, of a clip of Marco Rubio saying that the reason we went to war with Iran was because Israel was going to attack them, and that would have caused them to attack us, and so we went in first. And that clip of Marco Rubio got a lot of attention because it was like, it essentially contradicted Trump's initial speech about, why we're going to war with Iran, that, it wasn't necessarily our decision, it was Israel's decision, and we were just trying to reduce our casualties based on Israel's military adventures, which obviously raises the concern of like, well, why are we letting Israel do this when we're, giving them all their weapons and funding? But then Trump came out, when people were asking about that in later press conferences with Trump, he said, if anything, I might have forced Israel's hand. So again, it's this question of the dynamic between the US and Israel is which is the vassal state? Are we just partners? Are we allies that just scratch each other's backs sometime? Or is one controlling the other? There's obviously a very strong sentiment on X that Israel is controlling the USA. But at the same time, me personally, I question if it's really the other way around, if it's the USA controlling Israel, or, maybe I think it probably the truth is that both parties think that they control each other, And then you saw the clip in the beginning of Pete Hegseth saying that we didn't start this war, but we will finish it. And so I'll get back to that. The question of why, if Iran was always part of the original deep state plan, why didn't we ever get to it? Why did this end with Obama in Syria and then apparently the white hat coup that installed Trump? If Obama took out Libya and was like trying to take out Syria, and actually Syria did finally go down, during Biden, right before this administration began. Did they just not have time to get to Iran, or was there another reason why Iran wasn't part of the original, or why Iran wasn't completed by these deep state actors? Perhaps it was because the goal wasn't to ever finish the wars in the Middle East, but to create a situation of endless war in the Middle East. And if you take out the final axis of evil power in the Middle East, you can't continue the endless wars there. So that may have been why they were just, milking this out as long as they possibly could. And this attack that we're doing right now could actually be ending the endless military involvement in the Middle East. I could even see a situation where, Iran attacks so many of our bases in the Middle East that maybe we decide to close some of them. Like, imagine that. We have 200 some odd military bases outside of our own country, which is like way more than any other country in the world. Do we really need all those military bases? And, how hard is it as a bureaucratic decision to actually close some of those, or even, downsize them? Because I'm sure the military industrial complex only wants expansion of those. Now, you also saw the clip, the very first clip in the intro, which kind of got me the most excited about this of all, was Melania Trump representing the USA at the UN Security Council. Now, a lot of people are just making fun of her, saying like, oh, it's like a whore, or like a Playboy model is like pretending to be a UN ambassador now. I haven't actually even read any articles about this, but like we have the video that she's there. I guess I'm not sure if this is like a permanent appointment now that she's taken on, or just a temporary position. But going back to everything we've talked about on this channel for the past 5 or more years, a lot of people believe that Melania has some kinds of extraterrestrial connections, that she may be Trump's connection to higher powers called the Pleiadians. So seeing her on the UN Security Council brings to my mind Pleiadian Security Council, which is something that appears in New Age and channeled literature as a group of extraterrestrials focused on assisting Earth's spiritual evolution, as they deliver messages intended to help humans transmute fear into love and develop intuition and prepare for collective awakening. So seeing Melania seated at the UN Security Council, it kind of gets me excited that, we may actually be seeing some extraterrestrial dynamics at play, with, a lot of people thinking Melania may represent more like Galactic Federation forces or Pleiadian forces, and this war being targeted at Iran, formerly the Persian Empire, which Babylon technically is in Iraq, but that whole region, originally in the origins of our civilization, as we are told, is Anunnaki influence or controlled. The gods of the Sumerians were the Anunnaki. And so this really could be like a battle between different galactic forces and different extraterrestrial races at play here. We also had Bibi Netanyahu on Hannity last night, or maybe the night before, and Trump specifically posted on X telling his subscribers to watch that interview. And in that interview, Bibi said that this is not an endless war. This is the gateway to peace. Now, of course, you can't believe Bibi Netanyahu all the time. But we've been talking about this for quite a long time, that Bibi is one of the top contenders as someone who may have already been replaced and is now like a white hat actor playing this role. And so I mean, I would never believe, from the mouth of the person who did the genocide in Gaza that, this is not going to be an endless war. This is a gateway to peace. But in a way, I do believe that that may be the truth, that this may be, it may be the final battle to end the endless wars in the Middle East, because even the whole thing in Gaza was, on the surface caused by Hamas. Now there's theories that Israel was funding Hamas and whatnot, but without Iran, there's no Hezbollah, there's no Hamas, there's no Houthi rebels, there's no more a lot of things. And so this could be like the ripping off the Band-Aid to get to the source of the problem, to treat it with the antibiotics, it's like, to make a little analogy. But there's also a lot of other signs that this is some kind of a Jewish operation. That the holiday Purim was happening in conjunction with this, I believe, on Monday. What was the exact date of it? Oh, March 3rd, I believe. It was also the blood moon, which a lot of people were expecting some military action around the blood moon, as well as a major planetary alignment. And so we're seeing, a major realignment of politics and geopolitics on Earth at the same time, which often happens. Purim is a Jewish holiday that commemorates the saving of the Jewish queen. Of the Jewish people by Queen Esther from annihilation at the hands of an official of the Akkadian Empire named Haman, as recounted in the book of Esther. So that's essentially, I think, like the Jews winning over the Persians, like being saved from the Persians. So it kind of aligns with what's happening today. Like, how they like to recreate and relive biblical stories. And just today was announced that Israel bombed Iran's top mullahs, which are their religious leaders, their imams, as they counted votes for their next supreme leader. So this is intended to be a regime change operation. But there are people seriously questioning whether you can do a regime change in a country like Iran with just aerial bombardment. But they're trying. I mean, every time they're trying to install the vice president gets blown up, and then they're trying to reform their government. The government gets blown up. And, Trump is saying, we're going to let the Iranian people take back their country. But what does that really mean? When do people actually take back their country and not secret societies and organizations that influenced by intelligence agencies? Who's going to choose the leader of these people? The people, quote, aren't just going to have an election. And I'd also need to look into how is Iran even running their elections? Is the West going to help Iran have an election by bringing in some Dominion voting machines, perhaps? One of the last things here in terms of developments before I get to my theories about this is that in one of Trump's appearances this week, I think yesterday, he seemed to have a pretty bad rash on his neck. To me, it looks even maybe a little bit like shingles. So, is this the real Trump? Is this a clone? Is the stress getting to him? Sometimes under severe stress is when shingles can break out, or maybe someone put some poison on his collar. I don't know, or maybe it's just a reaction, but it doesn't look very good. Trump has looked a little stressed. I mean, whoever is playing the role of Trump has looked a little bit fatigued by this. I think he probably knows how low the support is. And either he's just uglying through it, doing what he needs to do to get it done, to cut off this evil at the source, or he is, feeling the stress of being blackmailed and, coerced by Israel into essentially destroying his own reputation and MAGA movement. I would hope for the first of those two options. So I have a couple of videos to play. The first is about why Iran's allies have not intervened in this yet. That would be Russia and China, who, in the past have supported Iran, given them weaponry. I'm not sure if they had a concrete defense agreement the way NATO has, But let's watch this clip and see what it says, because I found this interesting and I want to include it in the video. I'm not sure if the right clip's going to play when I go here, but I'll make sure the right one plays shortly.
Who's at the very top? Who really rules?
Why China and Russia won't fight for Iran. For years, Iran believed it had powerful friends, Russia, China, but as US military pressure intensifies, Tehran is discovering something uncomfortable. Its allies are transactional, not loyal. Since 2018, after the United States exited the nuclear deal, Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, pushed a look east strategy. The logic was simple. If the West isolates us, we pivot to Moscow and Beijing, and Iran followed through. Joint naval drills in the Gulf of Oman, missile cooperation, oil sales to China, military coordination in Syria. On paper, the partnership looked strong. But when it comes to actual war with the United States, the support shrinks dramatically. This week, Russia and Iran held a small naval drill in the Gulf of Oman. China plans to join future exercises in the Strait of Hormuz. Now compare that to US deployments. Carrier strike groups, long-range bombers, advanced air defense systems, weeks-long sustained strike capability. US officials say Washington now has the option of launching a prolonged air campaign, not just a limited strike like the June Midnight Hammer operation. In contrast, Russia's helicopter carrier left immediately after the exercise ended. So why won't China intervene? China is Iran's largest oil customer. Roughly 20% of the world's oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz. But Beijing's priority is stability, not confrontation. Aligning openly with Iran against the United States would damage relations with Washington, risk sanctions, endanger Gulf economic partnerships, disrupt global oil flows. China's approach is clear. Preserve oil access, avoid direct conflict, position itself for influence if Iran's leadership changes. If the regime collapses, Beijing will secure energy flows, not defend Tehran militarily. And what about Russia? Moscow has benefited from Iran. Drone cooperation, sanctions evasion networks, regional coordination, but Russia is calculating carefully. It does not want to push Trump closer to Ukraine, risk direct US-Russia confrontation, stretch its own military capacity. Russian leaders may hope the Iranian regime survives, but they are unlikely to go to war with the United States to save it. Iran still holds leverage. It can disrupt the Strait of Hormuz regional oil infrastructure. US bases via proxies. Around 20% of global oil flows through Hormuz. That is Tehran's deterrent. But escalation there would also hurt China, its biggest customer, which is another reason Beijing prefers restraint. The narrative of a unified anti-Western axis is overstated. Russia and China share interests with Iran, but they do not share existential commitment. If the United States strikes Iran, Beijing and Moscow will calculate based on their own survival, their own economy, their own wars, not Tehran's, and that leaves Iran facing the most powerful military in the world, largely alone.
Okay, so that essentially explained why this likely won't become World War III. You know, it's just a couple-day military operation, and I think like China and maybe Russia have condemned this, but they're not getting involved. So the next clip I want to play looks at more of a higher level that gets into, you know, my own assessment of this and talks about like who's really controlling our world, and could Iran actually be a lot more important in the bigger picture of who controls our world than most people have realized up till now. So check out this short clip.
Who's at the very top? Who really rules the world? And I discovered it's a very, very interesting history of ancient Iranian tribes, the original Zoroastrians, and the first world Persian Empire that has controlled the world for the last 5,000 years. The interests behind the Jesuits, the entities that created the Jesuits during the Renaissance in Italy, it was none other than Alessandro Farnese, a Persian From ancient Persia, his family came through Cappadocia in eastern Turkey, eventually to Italy, and they founded the first 10 Etruscan cities in Italy. And when those were razed, they destroyed them and they created the Roman Empire. The Pope, for instance, wears a papal tiara dome, the papal dome, which is called the papal tiara. Well, that's what men in charge of tribes in Central Asia wear. They wear those very large domed hats.
Okay. So starting to think about, is Iran more important in this bigger scheme of who really controls our world than we've really, or most people have really thought about so far? And, you know, the Pope hat she's referring to is called like the hat of Dagon, who is connected to the old Sumerian and Canaanite pantheons. Now, before I get into my own assessment of this, I guess we'll do a quick little promo for D.S.M.P. and connect this to some of the maps that are relevant to what we're going to be talking about here. You know, specifically, let's get this horrible picture of Trump off the screen. The world hierarchy pyramid, which you also see behind me here. You know, we all knew that like this power structure is pyramidal, hierarchical. It goes up to the top. It goes up to, you know, a lot of people think like the Rothschilds are controlling everything. But even beyond that, there's older families that have, you know, wealth since the Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, like the black nobility families, the ones she mentioned in that video, the Farnaces. But where did they get their power? You know, how did they become the black nobility? Did they go back even further? And I guess she's saying that the Farnese family goes back to the Persians. And maybe this all goes back to like the Sumerians, the Persians, the Anunnaki, and these extraterrestrial factions, which you cannot discount the extraterrestrial factions in all the affairs and wars on the surface here on Earth. And so even on this world hierarchy pyramid, you know, I don't say like exactly like which family is controlling the most. You know, we have up, you know, very high on this list, like black nobility families. But we also have like the Islamic royal families as well, you know, specifically the House of Saud and like the Sunni Grand Imam. Where even is black nobility on here? It's on here. You know, we got bloodlines of the Illuminati and papal bloodlines both, with which papal bloodlines are the black nobility. It doesn't say black nobility specifically. Then, you know, if you want to look into the gods too, we have the deity chart, which you can see, you know, where Dagon connects, where the Anunnaki connect, like which deities in the Western pantheons are correlated with these Anunnaki, Enki, and Enlil type deities. And then, of course, we have the Maestro Map, which you also see behind me down there, the poster version. And the plan for term 2, which, you know, are we on track or are we getting off track, is the discussion that we're going to have. And so watch this 1-minute promo for everything we offer on dsmp.io, and then we'll get into that.
Truth seekers, are you ready to uncover the secrets they don't want you to know? At dsmp.io, we're not just a store. We're a portal to the unknown, prints and posters that unveil hidden truths. From ancient mysteries to modern cover-ups, fill your space with tapestries woven with cosmic secrets. Tap into the energy of hand-selected crystals to awaken your mind. Explore exclusive packets packed with forbidden knowledge. Cleanse your body and spirit with products designed to strip away the toxins of a corrupted world. In the chaos of today, we give you the tools to stay sharp and to stay awakened. This is more than shopping. This is a movement. Step through the portal. Discover the truth. dsmp.io. Truth disguised as art.
Okay, so yeah, the big question here is the Maestro Map still accurate? Well, on the surface level, this attack on Iran is a little bit embarrassing for people that have supported Trump since 2015, 16. We were told very specifically, and you saw the clip in the intro, peace through strength, end the endless wars. Even in the very initial Republican debates in the primaries before 2016, he came out very strongly saying that the Iraq war was wrong, and presumptively, like, we shouldn't keep doing these Middle East regime change wars. And so on the surface, it seems like a little bit of a betrayal, a little bit of a 180 in tone. However, we made this Maestro map not knowing exactly what would happen in term 2, but doing our best to speculate and, foresee the future. On the right here, we have stop wars, peace, prosperity, and economic boom. And on the left, we have secret war declass and deep state obliteration. Now, the question here is, what do we mean by deep state obliteration, and what does that entail? Because this does not exactly say what deep state obliteration entails. Assumably, the never-ending fantasy of mass arrests, Nuremberg 2.0 trials, and public executions. That's sort of what we expected maybe domestically. But what does deep state obliteration look like internationally? I don't think it's out of the question that it may involve some military operations, strategic ones, not endless wars. I would say at this point, the Iran thing is nowhere near being considered an endless war. And, we could even consider it more like a public execution, the way it has gone so rapidly. Same with what's his name again? The one from Mexico, 𝕯𝖊𝖚𝖘, the cartel leader. And similarly with Maduro from Venezuela as well. The only thing it really mentions is public execution. And so what are we seeing in Iran? Public execution of this Ayatollah, this supreme leader, who, there's a lot of evidence that he's not a good guy, that he's evil, that he's spreading his evil throughout the world. And his mullahs, which are the religious leaders, I believe they descend ultimately from the Anunnaki. This is the region, this is the MO. And so by allying with Israel to defeat the Iranians, the US is essentially allied with one Anunnaki faction to destroy an even older Anunnaki faction. Israel for last, but Iran first. And we have the Pleiadian ambassador Melania now sitting on the Security Council, which even more suggests that this could be an even deeper battle between exopolitical factions. So it's like no more messing around. At its core, I do believe that Islam is satanic. And that's very apparent, like with the way they conduct jihad, which actually we have here to bring back our slides briefly. We have the written statement issued by, let's see, who is this issued by exactly? Let me just read it. This is not a drill. Iran has officially declared jihad, maybe yet again, against the United States and Israel. A formal religious decree has been issued citing Quran 2239, granting divine permission to wage war against crusader aggression. And it goes on and on. So I'm not sure which of their religious leaders issued that, but they're still out there doing it. This is calling for terrorism. And so, like I said before, like this could be seen as the last crusade. They are calling this the last crusade or a crusade. And so maybe we just need to embrace it, that, we need to vanquish this evil at its root. And again, look at Pete Hegseth's tattoos might tell you that this really is what we have in mind, even changing the name of the Department of Defense to the Department of War. Trump promised us to obliterate the deep state, and obliterate is a very specific word. It does not mean a gentle transition of power. So maybe it's time for us to grow a pair and realize that we need to go to war with the deep state to ultimately destroy it and obliterate it. Trump already is claiming to have ended 10 wars during the first year of his second term, and Iran really may only end up being a special military operation, not a full-on war. Therefore, he can start 9 more wars or special military operations before he even breaks even. That's a little bit of a joke, but the Maestro map, I would say, remains accurate. You know, there were events and operations that were unforeseeable when this was made back in September 2024, maybe even August 2024, before the election even happened. You know, it's been accurate in a lot of different ways. But ultimately, I believe that the Iranian regime is controlled by Anunnaki and reptilian. And this is quite apparent when you look at their parliament, which has been struck. There is blatant Illuminati and reptilian symbolism built into their parliament building, with the outside being the shape of a pyramid with, I believe, 33 windows, and the inside, like the centerpiece here, having this concentric pyramid design. I mean, it looks like the world hierarchy pyramid practically. And the symbol even on their flag, I would say looks, I'm not sure what it's meant to represent, but it looks very much like a reptilian eye. And by the way, this was not their flag prior to the current Islamic regime that took power in the 1970s. So you could really see this in a way as the USA versus reptilians. And I really am being guided to believe that Iran is genuinely a state that's run by an evil regime that's promoting this form of Islam, which, you know, you could argue like all forms of Islam, there's something a bit wrong with it. But, you know, they have enslaved the women. They promote rape culture, a lot of other things, Sharia law. So I'm not necessarily opposed to leveling it, especially this Iranian parliament building. Now, news has broke that this building was hit, the Iranian parliament building, which also tells you that we're not messing around. Like the way Russia's kind of just like messing around with Ukraine for years on end. It's like, when you go in, blow up the parliament. Like, that means you're really serious about regime change. And, you know, with a building that has Satanism built into the architecture like this, you know, we don't even want the next administration coming in and using the same structure. Like, this needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. It needs to be glassed, you know? So I also think it's not a coincidence that Trump just last week announced that he was going to be declassifying aliens that may connect to ultimately understanding the reasons why this Iranian regime is like evil for more reasons than one. And immediately went to a war with Iran after saying that he would declassify aliens, possibly because this is a place where there is a severe reptilian infestation. Now, I definitely don't want to be misconstrued that the Iranian people are all reptilians or Anunnaki, but that it's their leadership. The reptilian Anunnaki have fucked up the world long enough with their Babylonian money magic. And once again, you know, Babylon was technically more close to Baghdad, Iraq, but, you know, this whole region was considered like Mesopotamia, Sumeria, the Persian Empire. And since we've already dealt with Iraq, these Anunnaki factions running this society, you know, are most prominently in Iran at this point. And Iran would be like the source of global terrorism and funding of a lot of these most radical groups. Iran geographically is also surrounded by mountains and very much like a geological fortress in the same way that Switzerland is. You consider it a fortress of the Anunnaki. Now, in a lot of our discussions of world power up till now, in a lot of ways, we've considered Switzerland as the head of the beast. But it seems that we may have already dealt with Switzerland through covert means and diplomatically, with the way that Donald Trump and this administration walked into Davos and essentially handed them their asses. It would seem that the World Economic Forum in Geneva and Davos and all these different international agencies may have already been dealt with largely by this white hat operation, and that we're now going to the source of the even older evil factions that were actually controlling the world from even deeper behind the scenes. In places like Iran, where they openly hate the free world, as Trump has said, they chant death to America openly and promote terrorist ideology, Sharia law, and Islamic rape culture, which is actually some of the things that are destroying the Western world from within because of Democrat politicians having an unlimited immigration policy for Muslims and people from Africa. So while this looks a lot like the deep state's original agenda of massive regime change in the Middle East, you have to wonder, why didn't the deep state ever actually take out Iran? I'm sure they had time. And even they did take out Iran and install the Shah in the 1950s with Operation Ajax. But that was overthrown, and the more radical Islamic regime came to power in the 1970s. But even still, based on the architecture and the symbolism alone, you can see that Iran was controlled by the Illuminati. It was the deep state proxy terror funder. And so, like Pete Hegseth said, Trump didn't start this war, but he will finish it. So I guess, with that in mind, I tepidly am interested in seeing where this goes. I will not say I fully support it because I don't want to see harm come to the Iranian people. I don't want to see harm come to U.S. troops. I would like to see some of those bases closed. I don't think we need that many bases all over the Middle East. Maybe one or two should do it. It's military-industrial complex. But I do not believe that this is all just Israel's design. There are concerns of Israel becoming greater Israel and a superpower in the Middle East, and then ultimately a superpower in the world. But I just don't see that happening. I think that it should be interesting to watch how this gets reversed and played on Israel ultimately in the end. So to really understand a lot of this, you would have to look a lot deeper into the history of Iran, which maybe we will do in future videos. But just to briefly cover it from, a brief little look into that I did today, the Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was effectively replaced by the Ayatollah Khamenei, who was just killed during the Iranian Revolution in 1979. That's when everything started going downhill in Iran for the women, and I'm not sure how they've done economically, but in terms of freedom and civil rights, essentially became an Islamic dictatorship with Sharia law. Key dates from those events were the Shah fled Iran into exile January 16th, 1979, marking the collapse of his rule amid massive protests, often described as the end of the monarchy in practice. Ayatollah Khamenei returned to Iran from exile that February 1979. It was greeted by millions. In also February 1979, Iranian armed forces declared neutrality, leading to the final overthrow of the Shah's regime and the revolutionaries taking full control. This date is widely recognized as the Victory Day of the Islamic Revolution, February 11th, 1979. Khamenei became the de facto leader immediately after February 11th, and he was formally established as supreme leader of the new Islamic Republic later in 1979, with the monarchy officially abolished after an April 1979 referendum approving the Islamic Republic. So he had a good run. We came, we saw, and now he's dead. So let's close this. And that's where we're at for now. So like I said in the beginning, I think people that are just saying, Israel's got Trump on a chain. We're just doing Israel's dirty work. Like, in some ways you can look at that. And I know I didn't go into as much detail in this video about the proofs for that theory, but I think this goes even deeper. I think there is a plan for Israel in the end. And while this isn't necessarily the way I would have liked to see it play out, I'm all about like the biggest hierarchy, you know, taking down who's ever at the top of this evil hierarchy. And, you know, we know ultimately it may be Satan, like a dragon that lives literally underground, or extraterrestrials on craft. But, you know, we have our own extraterrestrials, and their name's Melania. No, I'm just kidding. But no, in all seriousness, I believe that their government was evil. And even though I don't necessarily want to be the world's policeman, I believe that Iran was one of the last and most evil, most powerful countries, you know, on the list. And so this could ultimately lead to a lot of other wars and terrorist activities being ended. And, you know, I've just actually been looking at the 𝕯🐫 map, you know, reviewing the bullet points of 𝕯🐫, which definitely include ending all wars, ceasing all aggressive U.S. government military actions worldwide, and establishing peace throughout the world. And, you know, there's so many signs that this is ultimately the agenda we're on, and maybe taking out Iran as the instigator of a lot of terror and worldwide unrest could be one of the keys to actually getting here. And even, you know, shutting the Strait of Hormuz could be a key to some of these economic disruptions that will ultimately lead to an economic crisis, a currency reset, a need for global liquidity, which will be XRP, and ultimately get us there in the end. And so, you know, we just got to keep an eye on how this goes down. Of course, you know, continue to be vocal about how we feel about things, not just blind support. But I think there's too many people just being blindly anti-war, because there are evil forces in this world that need to be obliterated. And of course, you know, they are stateside as well, but even more evil ones, you know, in other countries. And so we're going to get there, and underground as well. You know, this, when we talk about obliterating the deep state, don't forget the underground bases, the reptilian hives. I'm not sure if Trump will disclose like the reptilian threat in this presidency, but, you know, talking about aliens, then going to war with what would be the most Anunnaki nation on the planet other than Israel, there's definitely more going on than meets the eye and that normies could comprehend. And so I do understand why his speech, you know, announcing this war, troubled me so and came off so disingenuous, because like that movie says, you can't handle the truth. A lot of people can't, but we can certainly handle the truth on New Templars, or at least try to find the truth as best we can. So once again, if you want to support D.S.M.P. and New Templars, check out dsmp.io. So many of these different maps can help you understand the bigger picture, like we talked about today, the world hierarchy pyramid, the Maestro Map, deity chart, 𝕯🐫, the original Q-Web. We've got it all. You know, this did not make reference to Iran, but I really found that one video clip interesting, connecting the Italian black nobility Farnese family to the Persians, and that really got me thinking about, you know, who really is in control here? Like, who is the greatest evil? You know, are they Catholic? Are they Islamic? Is it a little bit of both? But, you know, I would... The least plausible explanation for this war is liberating the Iranian people, but I do believe that that could be a beneficial side effect of taking out the evil Islamic regime that has been there. And so pray for our troops, pray for the Iranian people, and we'll see you on the next video. New Templars.
Yeah. messaging so much that he can actually control exactly what people think.
You've been living in a dream world, Neo. This is the world as it exists today.
Welcome to the future of finance.
Our movement is about replacing a failed and corrupt political establishment with a new government controlled by you, the American people.
Calm before the storm.
What's storm, Mr. President?
You'll find out. You'll find out.